I caught my husband cheating. Most people find out about an affair by seeing messages on their partner's phone, but I actually saw it happen with my own eyes, and it was in a public place where anyone could have seen. I'd always been a little suspicious, but I never expected to catch him like that. My name is Christina. I'm a stay-at-home mom with a 6-year-old son. The day it happened, my husband was supposed to be off work, and we'd planned a family outing, but when I woke up, he was already gone. He'd left a message saying he was going to take care of his sister, who had a fever, and would be back in the evening. I sighed in frustration. Our son had been excited to go to the amusement park, and this was supposed to be a rare day for us to spend together. My husband had been busy with a big project for 6 months without any breaks, so I'd been really looking forward to this. It also struck me as strange. His sister had a fiancé who could care for her, so why did he have to go? My husband has always been very attached to his sister. In fact, he once told me he started dating me because I looked like her. While that may have been a compliment, it also made me uncomfortable. I met his sister once. She's kind and beautiful, but I still felt weird about him comparing me to her. Before we had our son, my husband used to talk about wanting both a boy and a girl and often initiated intimacy, but after our son was born, he stopped being affectionate, and our intimacy disappeared completely, given how much he used to enjoy it. I wondered if he was finding that connection somewhere else. Still, what bothers me even more is how he disappears on his days off. Like today, he rarely spends time with our child, even though our son adores him. It breaks my heart when my son cries because his dad isn't around. My husband doesn't even attend his school events or prepare birthday gifts. Even on the rare days he comes home early, he just locks himself in his room to play video games and avoids spending time with us. I thought maybe he was working hard on his project, but I recently found out that wasn't true either. I asked an old friend who works at the same company if my husband was actually busy. They laughed and told me he's known as a windowside employee, someone who has little to do and leaves on time every day. I knew something was off. My husband kept claiming he was busy with a big project, but his salary hadn't gone up. It was still around $1,500 a month. Plus, he didn't look tired at all. Instead, he seemed relaxed, which only made me more suspicious that he might be cheating. While I was feeling frustrated, I made breakfast. Then I realized something strange. My son, who's always up by 7 a.m., on his own, was still asleep, and it was getting late. If he didn't hurry, he'd miss the school bus, so I went to his room to wake him. He didn't respond, just let out a groan of pain. Worried, I touched his forehead. It was burning hot. When I shook his shoulder gently, he barely opened his eyes and whispered, "Mom, I can't breathe." My heart sank. There'd been a disease outbreak at his nursery school, and I was terrified that he might be infected. Some kids had even died from it. I tried to call my husband in a panic, but he didn't answer. I sent him a message and then called my mom, who's a nurse, for advice on what to do. Following her instructions, I quickly made an ice pillow for him and checked his temperature. It was over 102 degrees Fahrenheit. I called an ambulance right away and kept him drinking water as we waited. Because of the infection risk, I couldn't ride in the ambulance, so I took a taxi to the hospital where they'd be taking him. I kept calling my husband along the way, hoping he'd answer, but he didn't. I left him an online message, praying he'd see it and come to the hospital. At the hospital, I waited anxiously outside the emergency treatment room, praying that my son would be okay. Years ago, my dad had gone into an emergency room and never made it out, so I couldn't help fearing the worst. My mom arrived to support me and kept reassuring me, saying, "It'll be okay, it'll be okay." An hour later, my son was stable, but the doctors said he needed to stay in the hospital for a week to recover fully. They moved him to a room, and I spent the night at the hospital, though my husband never showed up. The next day, I went home to pack clothes for my son and decided to bring him some fruit as a get-well gift. I also planned to thank the doctor who had helped us, so I passed by the emergency area. Suddenly, there was a commotion as paramedics brought in 2 people on stretchers, mostly covered by thin blankets. From the looks of it, they were a couple who had gotten stuck together during intimacy. Feeling awkward, I tried to avoid looking and started to leave, but then I made eye contact with the man and froze. It was my husband. "What are you doing here?" I blurted out in shock. He stammered, I caught my sister's cold, and, I was speechless. Why was my husband here, naked, and with another woman right after our son had been hospitalized? My head was spinning with questions. Then, as I looked at the woman he was with, I felt a surge of anger. I recognized her. It was his sister, Brenna. Time seemed to slow down as it all sank in. I'd suspected he was lying when he said he was taking care of his sister, but I never imagined this. Even if he had come to visit our son, there was no reason he'd show up in this condition, and with his own sister. It was beyond belief. Since they were on stretchers and being taken for treatment, I had to hold back my urge to confront them and wait until later. They couldn't avoid facing me forever, so I decided to confront them later. With a sick feeling in my chest, I went back to my son's hospital room to be with him and sort through my feelings. After a while, I checked my phone and saw tons of messages from my husband. As I expected, he was trying to cover up the situation, but he didn't mention our son or ask about his health at all. I ignored his messages and stayed focused on my son. An hour later, the doctor who had treated my son came in and smiled. "Your son is very healthy and recovering quickly," he said. "His fever's down, and his condition is stable. We thought he might have an infection, but it turned out to be heat stroke along with a cold. Giving him water was the right thing to do. You're a smart mom, he's lucky to have you." I thanked the doctor, feeling grateful for my mom's advice. I thought about buying her a nice gift later to show my appreciation, but, as relieved as I felt about my son's recovery, I could feel anger boiling up inside me, thinking about my husband. Apparently, my anger showed on my face, because my son looked at me and said, "Mama, your face looks scary." I forced a smile and reassured him, saying I'd be back soon. Once I left the hospital, I called my husband, who had left over 100 missed calls. The moment he picked up, he started rambling with excuses, saying, "It's not what it looked like, there's a reason," and kept going. I felt disgusted. Shouldn't he have been more concerned about our son instead of making excuses? The fact that he could do something like this with his own sister, while ignoring our child's needs, made me worry about our son's future. I realized he'd never change, so I decided right then to divorce him. It might be hard, but I could manage it for my son's sake. "So, you were busy with that while our son was suffering, huh? You probably did this every chance you got, and with your own sister, that's just disgusting," I told him bluntly. He had no words. I continued, "Oh, and by the way, I've already told your parents, but don't worry, I won't tell your company. I'd rather you keep your job so you can pay alimony and child support. Goodbye." 3 days later, my son was fully recovered, and we finally returned home together. Of course, my husband wasn't there. After that incident, he tried to apologize in person, but I handed him the divorce papers I'd already signed. He begged me to forgive him, insisting it was his first mistake and that I was all he had. I replied coldly, "You're still lying. I already know everything, your sister told me everything." I knew he'd resist the divorce, so I approached his sister first. I casually congratulated her on her upcoming wedding, then added, "I came up with a great story to share with everyone. Want to hear it?" Panicked, she pleaded with me not to tell anyone, saying it would ruin her life. I pretended to consider it. "Fine, I'll keep quiet, but only if you tell me exactly how many times you were with my husband." Without hesitation, she confessed everything. When I told my husband, he fainted from the shock of his sister's betrayal. After he recovered, he finally signed the divorce papers and left with a heavy heart. I proceeded through a lawyer to secure full custody of our son, along with alimony and child support. My husband initially argued over the amount, but when I leaned in and whispered, "Want me to let everyone know what happened?" he quickly agreed to pay. A month later, he was fired from his job after his company somehow found out. Now, he works at a food factory, putting strawberries on cakes to pay alimony and child support. Even there, the rumors about him spread, and young workers gossip about him constantly. As for his sister, despite my silence, the truth came out, and her engagement was called off. Her ex-fiancé, who suspected she was cheating, had hired a private investigator. Furious, he demanded a large amount in compensation, and now she works at a nightclub to pay him back. Recently, her ex-fiancé even gave me a photo of her and my husband in the act, saying, "Use it if you ever need to." I tucked it away in case my husband tries to cause any more trouble. I've since moved back to my parents' house to start fresh, raising my son with their help. They're thrilled to finally spend time with their grandson after living so far away for so long. My parents offered to help me as much as possible, though I don't want to rely on them too much. I'll lean on them only when I truly need to. By the way, my son has been perfectly healthy since that high fever, like it never even happened. He's been awarded perfect attendance for 3 years now, He seems to have completely forgotten about his biological father and enjoys life every day, which makes me happier than anything. Oh, and our family has grown. Angel, our white cat, is now peacefully sleeping on my lap. Before we moved, Angel often came to play in my yard. When I went to say goodbye, he jumped onto my lap and stayed there, like he wanted to come along. I was sad to leave him, so I brought him with me to my parents' house. Now, he's close with my parents, and he's become just as important to me as my son. Now, I look forward to watching my son grow up surrounded by love from my parents and Angel. Sitting here on the porch, stroking Angel, I feel peaceful and hopeful for the future.